Can Protestants and Catholics ever live in peace together? Will there always be a Northern Ireland? Could a Paisley and an Adams ever find a middle path? Because of the government's ban, we can't use his own voice, so his words will be spoken simultaneously by an interpreter.
The Unionists are our people. We need them to make peace.
Hello and welcome to this special ITV programme on the road ahead for Ireland. It's a long road with many obstacles on the way, but we hope to be able to map it out clearly for you. One vital factor has allowed the journey to begin, the IRA's ceasefire. For 85 hours now, it's been solid. In the next hour, we'll be speaking to the people who've created the new opportunity for peace. Julia Somerville is in Dublin to interview the Irish Prime Minister, Albert Reynolds. I'll be talking to the Northern Ireland Secretary, to Unionists, Nationalists and to Gerry Adams, the President of Sinn Féin. In the studio we have a panel of specialists to help steer us through the complex issues. ITN's political editor, Michael Brunson, is joined by the top Belfast journalist, Eamon Malley, and Dr Brendan O'Leary from the London School of Economics. Well, experts and politicians agree on one thing already. There can be no peace in Ireland without political progress. Fighting it out on the streets of Ulster for 25 years has achieved little or nothing. The way forward, the road ahead, was laid out by Mr Major and Mr Reynolds in the Downing Street Declaration 9 months ago. What Mr Major and Mr Reynolds offered the IRA was quite simple. Proper political talks in exchange for an end to the armed struggle. Now let's imagine, perhaps optimistically, that all goes according to plan. Stage 1 is exploratory discussions to take place in 90 days' time. 3 top government officials will meet 3 representatives from Sinn Féin or the IRA face to face. Stage 2, running in parallel, is the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation, a kind of discussion group run by the Irish government involving all interested parties. Stage 3 is to bring the Republicans into the formal all-party talks on the future of Northern Ireland. The all-party talks have been running off and on for 3 years already, with very mixed success. The players are the Irish and British governments, John Hume's nationalist SDLP, Mr Molyneux's official Unionists and the small middle-class Alliance Party. Mr Paisley's Democratic Unionists have walked out in the past, and even if Sinn Féin wants to get round the table, it seems unlikely the Unionists will be willing to join them. Well, no one's pretending it's going to be a smooth ride, least of all the architects of the Downing Street Declaration. Over now to Dublin and Julia Somerville, who's with the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, Albert Reynolds.
Mr Reynolds, the Downing Street Declaration creates, in effect, a 90-day vacuum, a decontamination period, if you like. But your government is in a position to fill that vacuum. What are you going to be using the time ahead to do?
This coming week I will be having meetings with political leaders who have intimated their intention of joining the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation, a commitment that I gave in the Downing Street Declaration, so I'm starting work on that straight away. I expect to have all those round of meetings over in the next 10 days, and that hopefully we can then get down to agreeing the representation, agreeing the terms of reference, and hopefully have the forum up and running by the end of October or a little later.
Isn't there a danger, though, that you'll be talking to the nationalist side on the one hand, and London, with its hands tied in that respect, will be talking to the unionist side, and that in this sense a sort of twin-track approach may occur, and that would surely undermine everything that you've been standing for so far. Do you worry that during this time London may be dragging its feet?
Well, I can understand the cautiousness of London. I can understand that their reticence to embrace it straight away because, like the unionist community, I'm sure most people did not ever expect that this kind of decision, this momentous decision, this gigantic step forward in the peace process would be made, and that it was made for good. that the IRA have given up violence for good. I mean, I don't think they expected it. So consequently, from the Unionist point of view, they want to question, they want to be cautious, they want to satisfy themselves, and the British government are doing the same. But I think that as the days and weeks go by, I think they will see and be assured that it is for real and that it is for good.
But could the caution kill the momentum?
Well, that's a matter for the British government. I mean, I think that we have an opportunity. It's been presented to us last Wednesday. It is a major opportunity to grasp. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to try and underpin that decision as soon as possible, and that's why I'm moving on the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation. The British government have to make up their own mind. I know that it is possible that I understand the Republican language better, that I know what it means, because the party I lead, Fianna Fáil, came out of an armed struggle itself. So this is, we have had this in Irish history before, but I would hope that in the shortest possible period, but I know people need space, need time to satisfy themselves and get rid of their fears. But the Unionist population have nothing to fear. The principles of the Unionist Declaration are going to guide both governments and guide all parties in the talks ahead. So they have nothing to fear, and I don't think anybody should fear peace, because peace threatens nobody.
The missing ingredient, though, is bringing the loyalist paramilitaries on board, and we know that the contacts that have been made in this direction by your government. But isn't your meeting with Gerry Adams, which is scheduled to take place fairly shortly, going to be a red rag to a bull as far as they're concerned, and do the very opposite from reassuring them?
Well, I would hope not, because everybody knows exactly where I'm coming from and where the Irish government is coming from. We committed ourselves to set up a Forum for Peace and Reconciliation. We're doing that. That forum is open to all parties, to Unionist parties, DUP. It's a matter of their decision as to whether they join now or whether they might want to see how it develops. But I would hope not, because I have made it quite clear that if we got a decision like we got last Wednesday night, then the door was open into the political process for Sinn Féin, and I'm delivering on that, and I don't think anybody should be surprised at that. But this idea of the government being in direct contact with paramilitaries, we haven't been in direct contact with any paramilitaries on either side all the way through. There are people who come to talk to us from time to time who give us a view. And the paramilitaries themselves have said on a number of occasions, the loyalist paramilitaries, that if the IRA violence stopped, that they would respond to that. But we have to give them time and space to make up their own mind and satisfy themselves that it is for good. But I can say quite openly and unequivocally, it is for good.
Looking at it from the other side, the necessity for Gerry Adams to show to his people that something is happening as a result, that there is a dividend from the fact they've declared a ceasefire. Would you want to see London following the example of your government and lifting the broadcasting ban on Sinn Féin, for instance, as a gesture?
Well, that's again their decision. We lifted it here. There were a lot of critics of it here. There were a lot of people who had serious reservations that it would give much more support to Sinn Féin and the IRA if we did it. Well, we did it. Our experience is that it hasn't done that. The support level hasn't increased in subsequent opinion polls. But it's a matter for the British government to make that decision themselves. John Major did say in Corfu and in Brussels that if he was satisfied that violence was given up for good, that he would be flexible, and indeed that he would be generous. I think when he has fully satisfied himself that, for a man who has given a total conviction and indeed an awful lot of time and effort to this, because after all, Northern Ireland can be a graveyard for British politicians and has been in the past, but he has shown the courage to take it this far, and I've no doubt that together we'll take it the rest of the way.
When you actually get down to the negotiating process, you will need a very big carrot to ensure that both sides keep at it until they reach a proper conclusion. Is this likely to take the form of the US aid package, which we know that the Clinton administration has up its sleeve? Do you see the Clinton administration, in other words, as playing a very important part now?
Well, Irish America and the American administration's views were always a very important factor in Republican thinking in the north of Ireland down through history, and indeed it is no different this time, except that President Clinton has taken a continuous and a continuing interest in trying to help the British and the Irish governments establish a peace process there. He has always said that he would underpin the peace process if that gigantic decision was taken. Well, it was taken this week, and true to form, he has come through and said yes, he will be recommending to his administration to get a package together to rebuild the areas that have been worst hit by the Troubles, areas along the border, cross-border regions, and indeed areas of Belfast area and wherever. Jacques Delors in the European Union has also given that commitment quite some time ago, that he will also consider and recommend to the European Union that a package be presented to underpin the peace process, because it is important to underpin it. Is it important to let people know that we were serious when we said we would welcome people in from the cold if they took that major decision? That decision has been taken. Things have changed. They will never be the same again from last Thursday morning, and we have to work it on from there day by day and week by week.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed.
The View from Dublin. Well, in the next part of the programme, we want to look at some of the obstacles ahead on the road to peace and analyse them in detail with the help of our panel of experts. The Downing Street Declaration makes it clear that political negotiations can only proceed if the IRA ceasefire holds. But can it hold in the face of extreme Republican or loyalist provocation? The loyalist terrorists have made their early intentions clear, murdering a Catholic man in Belfast on the very first day of the IRA ceasefire. They've also released this defiant photograph, which doesn't bode well for an early end to loyalist violence. It was loyalist provocation which destroyed the last IRA ceasefire back in 1975, leading to a huge surge in sectarian violence. How can you prevent one determined extremist, another Michael Stone character, derailing the whole process? With murderous attacks like the one on Milltown Cemetery. Sinn Féin say it's the army's problem, but if they can't stop loyalist attacks, the IRA may feel they have to defend their own community. Well, let's put some of those points to our panel. Michael Brunson, if I can start with you. We've heard there from Mr. Reynolds that he's had contacts with loyalist paramilitaries. Does Downing Street now see the loyalists as the remaining obstacle to peace?
Well, it would obviously be a very difficult problem indeed if there were an outbreak of loyalist violence. But this, in a way, doesn't it, underlines the huge importance of the cessation of violence so far, because we have only had one or perhaps two incidents of loyalist violence thus far. It all, though, underlines the fact that the loyalist violence is, in the end, going to depend on the degree to which the Unionist population as a whole are reassured. And if the loyalist gunmen, who are, if you like, the most extreme expression of Unionist feeling, are unhappy or get nervous, then obviously there could be a problem. It's all about, therefore, the British government saying time and time again, this is an open process, no secret deals, nothing behind your back. The union is secure. We want to underline that, and that's why Mr. Major has been saying that over and over again.
Well, Eamon Malley, from your experience of the streets of Belfast, is there any indication yet that the loyalists are actively considering a ceasefire?
No, I don't think that a ceasefire is imminent. Indeed, a source with whom I spoke last night, who's got an insight into the UVF, for example, one of the major loyalist paramilitary groupings, actually said that only if and when the constitutional position of Northern Ireland is secure within the Union would there be any possibility of a ceasefire. And furthermore, I think that the government will have to go a long way to assure Ian Paisley, for example, that there's no underhand deal going on before we can even get to the position where a ceasefire will take place, I think.
Well, without a loyalist ceasefire, Dr. O'Leary, can the ceasefire survive a loyalist backlash?
I think it can. I think the Republicans will remain disciplined if there are any loyalist incursions into Catholic areas, and the security forces will have to demonstrate that they're impartial and uphold the rule of law. In the long run, it becomes rational for the loyalist paramilitaries to commit themselves to a ceasefire process as well, because if they continue the violence, if they're held responsible for the conflict, then they create their nightmare scenario in which large sections of the loyalist community are at war with the British state, and they'll want to prevent that.
Gentlemen, for the time being, thanks very much indeed. Well, Unionists want assurances that there have been no deals, but Republicans are expecting some short-term benefits from the ceasefire. Sinn Féin wants a prisoner amnesty and troops out of Catholic areas. Unionists would like to see the IRA handing in its weapons. So what about the guns and the prisoners? The first thing that the Republicans expect from a ceasefire is a reduced security presence in Catholic areas. There are 19,500 British troops on the streets of Ulster now. But is the troops out message realistic or safe, especially with the very real threat of a loyalist backlash hanging over the province? An amnesty is close to the top of the Republican agenda for prisoners serving jail sentences. There are some 900 of them, many convicted of murder. 450 loyalist terrorists are also serving sentences. The official British position is no amnesty, but if there is no armed struggle, are the men in the maze still a threat? And then there are unsolved terrorist crimes, like the Bishopsgate bomb in the City of London, the Harrods bomb, Deal Barracks and last year's Warrington bomb. Could the police simply close the books? Another issue is giving up arms. For many Unionists, the ceasefire is an illusion unless the IRA hand in their weapons and explosives. The IRA has made it clear this is simply not on the cards for now. To them, it's a matter of pride and common sense. Eamon Malley, this idea of demilitarisation, is there any indication yet on the streets of Northern Ireland that there is a scaling down of security force activity?
I think there is. The Chief Constable said some weeks ago that the level of troops, etc., will be commensurate with the level of threat. I think things are happening. A Sinn Féin councillor told me last night, for example, that in the past 2 or 3 days he hasn't had a single complaint about police behaviour in North Belfast. For example, no allegations of harassment of young people, no hassling of young people, etc., no searches, raids, etc. So that would suggest that there is a subtle change taking place on the ground at the direction of the Chief Constable, Sir Hugh Ansley.
Michael Bronson, this question of prisoners, transfers or amnesties is going to be very, very difficult indeed for the British government, isn't it? We saw the fuss that happened over the transfer that happened a couple of days ago.
Yes, but I think that fuss was a result of a special case. It was clearly bad timing to do that particular action at that time. But don't forget, it's the policy of the government that prisoners should serve their sentences as close to their families as possible. And within that, I think you will be able to see that that's one of the gestures, the confidence-building measures that can go ahead. As for the guns, both sides, of course, have the guns, have the explosives, and that, I think, will wait until the talks about talks. It'll be a very important part of those talks about talks, incidentally, about how that's resolved.
Brendan O'Leary, do you believe that small concessions can be made, and if so, when?
I think small concessions can be made, the lifting of the broadcasting ban, perhaps movement on exclusion orders. But the key thing that we'll expect in the weeks ahead is that the momentum will come from the Irish government, as the Taoiseach was indicating. And the British government will have to speak with two voices, which are potentially consistent, but they'll have to manage it very carefully. On the one hand, they'll have to persuade Unionists that their position is secure in Northern Ireland as long as they're a majority. And on the other hand, they'll have to persuade Republicans and Nationalists that everything else is up for constitutional negotiation and dialogue. And that will be difficult to do, but it can be done.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Well, amnesties, demilitarisation, these are things for the medium term. But what about the long term, maybe another 25 years down the road ahead? Can Protestants and Catholics ever live in peace together? Will there always be a Northern Ireland? The Unionists and Loyalists in Northern Ireland feel British. Their name says it all. They want to stay part of the United Kingdom. Republicans and Nationalists feel Irish. They want a united Ireland. Can there ever be a middle ground? In South Africa, de Klerk and Mandela found one. In the Middle East, Arafat and Rabin found one. But could a Paisley and an Adams ever find a middle path? London and Dublin believe they might, and they've drawn up a framework for discussion. First, power sharing, some kind of devolved government for Northern Ireland with guaranteed representation for the Catholic minority. Second, cross-border cooperation, Dublin and London sharing control over certain institutions, say border security, tourism, maybe joint monitoring of human rights. And third, the Constitution, the trickiest of the three. London and Dublin agree to remove all constitutional claims to Northern Ireland, leaving it up to the people of Northern Ireland to decide for themselves. Well, at this stage, we're nowhere near any kind of all-party agreement on any of the three areas for discussion. But in a moment, I'll be talking to the Northern Ireland Secretary, Sir Patrick Mayhew, and the Sinn Féin leader, Gerry Adams, about all the issues raised in our analysis so far. We'll also be hearing from leading Unionists and the SDLP leader, John Hume. Join me in a couple of minutes. Hello, Gerry Adams. It's Dermot Monaghan here in London at ITN. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Right.
Dermot, could I just make one point here?
Sure.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'd be very obliged if you would make the point about this ridiculous ban. And I do think it's time, especially at this time, that some broadcaster put the British Army to the test, the British government to the test on this decision, because they're expecting you and others to police this ban. I think at some point in time, someone has to let my voice and voices of other Sinn Féin people be heard and see what the British government says about it. Certainly, in the meantime, I would like to ask you to raise and to draw attention to the absurdity of this situation we're discussing in a program which you think is important enough to put in such a prominent position. The voice of the people that I represent can't even be heard.
Well, Gerry Adams, I mean, that is, of course, a point that I will put to you. It is a point that, as you know, all broadcasters, we flag all our interviews with you, almost to point that up. So it is an issue that will be taken up in the programme.
Okay.
Okay, we should be coming to you in about 10 minutes or so.
Okay. How long will we be doing it? Dermot?
Yes, I'm just checking.
How long will we be doing?
I'm just checking, Mr. Adams. I'm just trying to, I think, hold on, what are we talking? 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Okay, and who finishes the programme? Hello?
We have a panel of experts, they finish it.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Stand by.
Welcome back to our special programme on the future prospects for Northern Ireland. Now, with the help of our panel, we've tried to put some of the most difficult issues into perspective. In this part of the programme, we'll be talking to leaders of the main parties in Northern Ireland, including Sinn Féin's president, Gerry Adams. But first, the British government view from Hillsborough, the official residence of the Northern Ireland Secretary, Sir Patrick Mayhew. Sir Patrick, let's deal with this word permanent first. Since day one of the ceasefire, the government has been unhappy about the lack of that word from the statement. Given that you still haven't indicated categorically whether you accept the other formulations, can you tell us now whether or not the clock has started ticking on the 90-day countdown?
It's the idea of permanence. The clock hasn't started yet, and it can't because the idea of permanence hasn't been clearly expressed. We're not hung up on a particular word. It's quite enough if they were to say, for example, this is over for good. But when we read in the Republican News, the newspaper of the Irish Republican movement, the use of the word suspension of violence, that is one of the reasons why we are sceptical. We want to believe that this is over for good. We want to believe that, so do the people of Northern Ireland as a whole. But we can't snatch at it and say, well, let's take a chance.
There does then seem to be some variance between your view and that of Mr. Reynolds and indeed of President Clinton.
Well, you see, it's a matter of interpretation, isn't it? None of us can know. It's only the IRA who, by the language that they employ, can give us a clear idea of their intention. It is what their intention is. We need to know what their intention is, and then there has to be, as the government has said for so long now, there has to be a period where deeds match up with words. In other words, no violence. I think it's well understood. I listened to Mr. Reynolds this morning, and he was saying that he understood the caution of the British government. I think it's absolutely easy to understand why there is a difference of approach to interpretation. You see, it is our police officers here, it is our country's soldiers, come to that, it is personally our friends who have suffered, who have been murdered, who have been maimed. Ministers personally have been mortared and bombed as ministers. And so, naturally enough, when we represent the interests of the people here in Northern Ireland who have suffered themselves for so long, 25 years, we are likely, I think, to be more cautious than euphoric. But I repeat, we hope and believe that this is permanent.
Well, Sir Patrick, then, in the interim, Sinn Féin have come up already with a shopping list of demands, anything from lifting the media ban to troops out of nationalist areas. How minded are you to make any concession, however small, to those demands?
Well, now, you cannot say at midnight on Wednesday, we have given up violence and we have given up justifying violence, and on Thursday then demand that the police force be removed. I just want to say this. The demand that the RUC should be, as I read it, withdrawn from the nationalist areas is not one that finds any favour with Dr. Joe Hendren, who is the nationalist, the SDLP Member of Parliament for West Belfast. He said in response to that he represents the majority of people in West Belfast and that they are very glad to see the RUC street after street, because they are there in part to protect the nationalist people from loyalist paramilitaries who are no less evil than the other sort.
You are walking a tightrope, aren't you, Sir Patrick? Any concessions of whatever kind could be misread by the loyalist community and lead to violence on the streets, jeopardising that ceasefire. Are you making every effort to bring about a loyalist ceasefire as well? Is there, for instance, a seat at a negotiating table in the future for them?
What has been made clear by the British government is that we respect every political democratic mandate. Sinn Féin have a democratic mandate. They stood at the last elections. They've been standing at elections for some time. The last election they got something like 10 or 11% of the votes in Northern Ireland, although they only got a tiny proportion of the votes in the Republic. We've said that there is a place for any substantial constitutional party at the talks, and that's the position. So we have always regarded loyalist violence, loyalist paramilitaries as every bit as evil as the other kind, and the RUC, for example, have always treated them with exactly the even-handed way that you would expect and hope.
Could we, Sir Patrick, just finally take up that issue of the talks you touched upon there? Now, for some time, your all-party talks have been limping along, already without the involvement of Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionist Party, who couldn't even stomach talking to John Hume or Mr. Reynolds. With the potential inclusion of Gerry Adams, surely those talks, as we look at them now, are doomed.
I think it's such a pity, you know, for people to look forward with the worst possible scenario in mind.
But that's based on what we know now.
There is really rather too much of that in and about the affairs of Northern Ireland. Now, let's assume that it's all hopeless. Let's look forward with some hope, but with cautious, prudent hope, and not with the euphoria, which I can well understand in some quarters, but which has really up here in Northern Ireland got to be tempered with real prudent caution.
Sir Patrick Mayhew, thank you very much. The Unionists, whatever the politicians in London and Dublin might say, are determined to ensure that Northern Ireland remains part of the United Kingdom. But there are divisions in their camp. The official Unionists, for now, accept the Downing Street process. The Democratic Unionists do not. From Belfast, we're joined by David Trimble of the OUP and Peter Robinson, Deputy Leader of the DUP. Mr Trimble, if I could start with you first, isn't now more than ever the wrong time for the Unionist family to be squabbling in public?
Well, it would help if you got the name of my party right to begin with. We'll try again.
From the official Unionists?
No, the Ulster Unionist Party.
I do apologise, Mr Trimble.
Thank you. Right. It is, of course, unfortunate that there's division within unionism. It's not of our making, and it's not of our wish. But there we are. But we'll go ahead. Speaking as I do as the representative of the largest party in Northern Ireland, we're quite confident that the greater number of the people of Northern Ireland can put their trust in the Ulster Unionist Party, led by James Molyneux, to safeguard their interests.
So the DUP can be discarded, effectively. Mr Robinson, what do you think about that?
Well, Mr Trimble seems to have forgotten that there was an election fairly recently at which my party got more votes than any other political party in Northern Ireland. That's the last election in Northern Ireland, so let's again get the facts right. As far as your report's concerned, I think that there is a correction that is required. You say that the Democratic Unionist Party won't speak to John Hume or to Albert Reynolds. We were involved in a talks process that had ministers from the government of the Irish Republic present, and which had Mr Hume and his party present. We took part in that process, and we didn't walk out of that process as your report suggested. The process ended because the British and Irish government decided that they were to bring it to an end to have a meeting of the Intergovernmental Conference.
Well, would you have an open mind about rejoining those talks if any representative from Sinn Féin was invited to them?
I think the Democratic Unionist Party would be involved with constitutional parties, providing they accepted the agenda Sinn Féin, of course, isn't a constitutional party. It has a mandate as a support organisation for a terrorist group. And the present agenda that has been suggested is one that isn't satisfactory to the Unionist community.
So you remain to be convinced. Mr Trimble, could you ever find yourself or members of your party sitting down alongside Gerry Adams?
No, I don't think so. It's, of course, possible that the Sinn Féin might so reform itself that one would regard it as a different organisation. After all, the official IRA did that as well, but with a very significant difference. The people who are now in the Democratic left are not people with blood on their hands. I remember when John Major said in the House of Commons that it would make his stomach turn to think of dealing with people like that. And I fully agreed with him then, and I agree with him now.
You surely must agree that the ceasefire is a positive move.
Oh yes, an end of violence is something very much to be welcomed. I hope it's going to be permanent. I must say I'm very deeply sceptical about it. And I think Sir Patrick Mayhew is quite right to be extremely cautious in his approach to the matter. What we do need to see happening in Northern Ireland, and desperately need to see happening, is to see some real sensible political progress. And we need to see some real democratic institutions put in place. And we need to see more regard paid to the views of the 90% of the people who do not support violence than are paid to the 10% who have supported violence.
Mr Robinson, you would surely agree that a loyalist backlash could endanger this fragile IRA ceasefire. Are you making every effort you can to ensure that the loyalists join a ceasefire?
Well, neither of us here support violence from any source. And each of us would be indicating that there should be no more violence from any source. That's a position that both of the Unionist parties have taken. The Protestant, the Unionist and the Loyalist people have nothing to fear from a ceasefire. They have nothing to fear from peace. They have been the ones who have suffered most during this terrorist
But should
campaign.
the Loyalist paramilitaries join a ceasefire?
They have suffered most from the terrorist campaign. What is concerning the Unionist community is what price has been paid in order to extract this concession, whether temporary or permanent, from the provisional IRA. And we will really only see that when we see the nature of the framework document that is expected to come from the two governments in a few weeks' time. That will indicate the nature of any concessions that have been given to Sinn Féin.
Now finally, can we staying with you, Mr Robinson, turn to this question of Mr Reynolds' Forum for Peace and Reconciliation. We interviewed him a few minutes ago. He's invited you to take part. Are you minded to?
Well, I think everybody knows that this is a platform for Gerry Adams and the IRA. That's what it's for. It was set up because the British government had refused the request by the Irish government to enter into immediate talks with the IRA. And therefore, Mr Reynolds had to come up with some device whereby he would give immediate platform to the IRA, and this was his device. So it's an IRA platform, and those misguided people from Northern Ireland who are taking part in it, I think, should consider it again. They are very naive if they think it's going to be anything else other than a device for the IRA.
Mr Trimble, do the Ulster Unionists regard it as an IRA platform?
It's a nationalist forum. It's even described by nationalists as a nationalist forum. And it's up to the nationalist parties to do what they want. As the Downing Street Declaration itself says, that the Irish Prime Minister will take action within his own jurisdiction. In other words, there's nothing in that document that even contemplates it extending to people in Northern Ireland. But if people in Northern Ireland want to go there, they're free to do so. We are British citizens. We will be operating within a British political framework in order to secure the future for the British people of Ulster. What Irish nationalists do is their concern, except that the Irish Republic has a contribution to make to peace by recognising the rights of the people of Northern Ireland and by making the necessary adjustments to its constitution and getting rid of its illegal territorial claim, which is the root cause of this trouble.
David Trimble, Peter Robinson, thank you both very much indeed. Well, the politician credited with taking the first steps to bring Sinn Féin into the democratic process was the leader of the nationalist SDLP, John Hume. His negotiations led directly to the Downing Street Declaration. ITN's Ireland correspondent Tom Bradby spoke to him in his home city of Derry.
Mr Hume, the situation is obviously still sensitive. If the Loyalists don't stop, will the IRA hold to its ceasefire?
Well, I would certainly believe so. I would think it very strange if the Loyalists don't stop, because they have said that if the IRA stopped, they would stop. And if they kept going, the only reason that British troops would be on our streets would be to deal with people who are fighting them to stay British. And I think that couldn't last too long, because it would lose them any sympathy that they have in Britain. And I'm sure that they have enough intelligence to know that.
Mr. Adams has asked for the troops and the police to be removed from the streets. Some people would say that's not realistic. What do you think would be a realistic compromise?
Well, I think the Chief Constable's recent statements were very sensible and common sense about these matters, because if the violence is totally stopped, as I believe it is on the IRA side, and I hope will soon happen on the loyalist side, then there's no need of any description for troops in our streets. And the whole population of Northern Ireland want the troops off our streets, so if the atmosphere is there for them to go off our streets, I don't see any problem in that at all.
Dealing with the substantive issues, it's been very difficult already without Sinn Féin for the parties to sit down and reach any kind of agreement. Isn't it going to be almost impossible once Sinn Féin become involved?
Well, it would be the first time ever that we would be sitting down to reach agreement with all sections of the people represented at the table, and, more importantly, in a totally peaceful atmosphere. That has never happened before, and I would believe that that atmosphere would put massive pressure on political leaders to ensure that by the people that we don't go back to the trenches of the past 25 years.
John Hume talking to ITN's Ireland correspondent Tom Bradby. Well, one man holds the pivotal role in making the IRA ceasefire stick. Gerry Adams persuaded the IRA that political negotiation can succeed where the armed struggle has failed. Now, of course, he must deliver. Mr. Adams was interned as a suspected terrorist in the early 1970s and later took part in earlier talks with the British government, which came to nothing. Mr. Adams joins us live from Belfast. Because of the government's ban, we can't use his own voice, so his words will be spoken simultaneously by an interpreter. Gerry Adams, we've just heard again today Sir Patrick Mayhew reiterating the point that as far as he's concerned, the clock on talks has not started ticking because they haven't heard some formulation of the words which amount to permanent to them. Now, Mr. Major says he'll be satisfied if he hears the words, and I quote them, "The armed conflict is over." Could you endorse that formulation?
Well, Dermot, let me say first of all that I'm very pleased that you kept the name of our party correct. Can I also say that your view with respect to those in Britain, your viewers must be disappointed and bewildered by the comments from Patrick Mayhew. Patrick Mayhew and Mr. Major authorised protracted dialogue and contact with our party over a long period without any preconditions. And at the time when the armed struggle from the IRA was at a very high pitch, both here in Ireland and in your country.
Mr. Adams, can we talk about this word permanent?
Of course we can talk about everything you want to talk about.
Well, I want to talk about the word permanent. Mr. Major says he will be satisfied if he hears words like the armed conflict is over or the days of violence are gone for good. Can you put a tick in any of those boxes?
Sorry, it is obvious that we have not yet got a peace settlement. It is obvious that anyone who has any sense wants to bring about a lasting and permanent peace. And that is Sinn Féin's goal. It is obvious for anyone who wants to read the IRA statement that when we say definitively, then they say definitively that there is a complete cessation of military operations. That is what they mean. Now, I think that Mr. Major and Mr. Mayhew are playing semantic word games here. And I think it's very important that we're not deflected.
Semantics or not, it could stall the peace process.
Dermot.
Isn't the fact of the matter that the word permanent, did you find it difficult to say the word permanent? The IRA find it difficult to say the word permanent because the IRA at some time reserves the right to rejoin, to take up arms again.
You're finding it very difficult to let me speak. Dermot, you have to let me speak. I want to see peace in my country. I want to see peace between all of the people in my country. The Unionists who were on earlier are my people. They have to be part of this peace process. All of the guns have to be taken out of Irish politics. British guns. You showed footage there of Milltown Cemetery. The guns used on that occasion and the grenades came from British military intelligence. You talked about amnesty. The British soldiers who killed people on Bloody Sunday in Derry were just given an amnesty. They weren't just given an amnesty, they were decorated for what they did. We need all of the guns out. There's a need for demilitarization. The IRA have taken a historically courageous step which has moved all of us closer towards a lasting peace.
Well,
now, please.
I've let you have your say, Mr. Adams. I just want to move it forward slightly. You talk about reconciliation. You call the Unionists your people. But they're going to find that very difficult to hear if at the same time you're calling for troops to be withdrawn from nationalist areas, for the police to leave them altogether.
Well, we need a negotiated political settlement here. I'm an Irish Republican. I think that the people of this island have the wit to govern ourselves. I think as part of that negotiated settlement, we need a real policing service, not an armed paramilitary state police force. We need an end to British troops, as well as an end to Irish Republican troops. We need an end to the loyalist gun squads. So when I lay out our agenda, I accept that other people have different views. I accept that other people have different attitudes. All I'm asking for is that we sit down and discuss this. It appears to me, you know, that perhaps the Unionists don't want the IRA to have a complete cessation. It appears to me, perhaps, that Mr. Major and Mr. Mayhew perhaps find it easier to deal with the conflict here than they do to deal with the historic opportunity to create peace.
Are you saying, Gerry Adams, that as you look at it now, the ceasefire could be in jeopardy?
No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that the momentum for peace must not be slowed down.
So you need concessions from the British government, and you need them pretty soon?
I've made it quite clear. I do not seek concessions. We want rights. The party which I represent deserves to be treated the same as any other party, no better and no worse. The people of all of this country deserve to be treated the same as the people of any other country, no better, no worse. Those aren't concessions, those are rights.
Well, I'm trying to get towards some specifics. You say you want to be treated as a normal political party.
Well, let me outline it.
Let's talk. You've been invited to the Labour Party conference by Tony Benn. Would you, if you could, attend that conference?
Well, of course I would. I was stopped going to Britain because I went to talk peace about a year ago. Of course I would go.
And
that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to represent our views. Can I just deal very briefly? There are three main areas need to be tackled here. There's the core constitutional issues, the political issues, which need fundamentally to be changed, and in my view, towards an agreed new Ireland. Then there are practical matters like demilitarization, like the prisoners, and so on and so forth. And then there are areas of democratic rights for equality of opportunity, for an end to discrimination on the basis of religion, for an end to discrimination against Irish speakers.
Well,
and I just
Mr.
want to
Adams,
make one point.
What would ensure those factors in Northern Ireland? Let's deal in reality. Looking ahead to some kind of constitutional settlement, you surely can't expect the United Ireland, which you're still wedded to. Can you sell to your supporters anything less?
Well, I don't see why a united Ireland should be dismissed by everyone in such an arbitrary fashion. Everything else has failed. Every other option has failed. 75 years of partition, a complete failure. 16 years of Unionist one-party rule, a complete failure. Decades, centuries of British interference in our affairs, a complete failure. And let me just, if I may, deal with the essence of what is required to move this situation forward. John Hume and I said that what we were doing threaten no section of our people. The Unionists are our people. We need them to make peace. Mr.
Adams.
Major needs to persuade them that that needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Gerry Adams, thank you very much indeed. Well, Mike Brunson, did you hear anything there different? Any chink of light there? Any cause for optimism?
I think what comes across is the extreme sensitivity on all sides, both from the Unionists and from what we've just heard from Gerry Adams. And that, I think, helps to explain why the British government's attitude, as you heard expressed today by Sir Patrick Mayhew, is real, prudent caution. Even the business of this ridiculous, in my view, broadcasting ban. You can see how difficult even the lifting of that is going to be.
We heard once again there Gerry Adams calling, it was a feature of the process last year, calling for the British government to act as persuaders with the Unionist population, to persuade them towards a united Ireland. Is there any indication that Downing Street is doing anything like that?
No, and they won't. They can't. They obviously can't. If this process is as much about building confidence on the Unionist side as building confidence on the Nationalist side, plainly, the British government cannot be seen as persuaders for a united Ireland.
And finally, we've talked a lot about the pitfalls. What are the causes for hope on the road to peace?
I think that we've got the ceasefire there. We're 5 days down the road along the ceasefire. As Eamon Malley was saying earlier, there are signs that things are beginning to happen very slowly. The danger is, of course, that everybody will want to force the pace a little too hard. But one of the key things, of course, also today was Mr. Reynolds saying that he understands the problems of the British government.
Michael Brunson, Eamon Malley, Brendan O'Leary, thank you all very much indeed. Well, you've heard the views of the experts and the politicians. From here on, it's up to those politicians and the people of Ireland, north and south of the border, to make progress down the road ahead. From all of us here, goodbye.